Welcome and thank you for joining us. I'm Laura Jones, and in this session I'm speaking with Dr. Stan Beecham. Dr. Beecham is an ultra runner, well-known sports psychology consultant and director and founding member of the Leadership Resource Centre in Atlanta, Georgia. He is also the author of the award-winning book Elite Minds. Dr. Beecham works with collegiate, Olympic and professional athletes from many sports, gaining him an insight into the minds of many great competitors. Dr. Beecham, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
It's good to be with you, Laura.
Okay, so let's start with a quote that many of us will have heard about ultra running, which is about the sport being 90% mental and the rest is physical. What are your thoughts on that quote?
It reminds me of the Yogi Berra quote. Yogi Berra is an American baseball player who was known to say all these really kind of funny things, and he said that baseball is 90% mental and the other half is physical. And I like that because, you can think about, any sport is what part is physical and what part is mental. But what I would say is you really can't break it up that way, right? I think what those kind of sayings are trying to get to is that both are important, right? There's a physical aspect and there's a mental aspect. And if you take one away, the whole thing topples over on itself. So, I mean, you take a sport like running, I mean, it's pretty clearly obvious that there are physical aspects to running, right? In terms of you need to be fit, you need to be in shape, you have to train, and those are all physical things. And then, of course, if you run a lot, you can notice that one day your body feels really good, and so your run feels simple. And then you go back the next day and do the same thing, and it feels 3 times as difficult. So, obviously, you're even your own conditioning in your own body, changes, day to day, hour to hour, right? So you feel that shift. I think what's important for ultra runners to understand is that it's not enough just to be physically fit. You can't just do the physical training. That what you have to also do is you have to train your mind. You have to prepare yourself for the mental challenges. And I would say, in a sport like running, obviously the longer the run, the more opportunity for unforeseen things to happen, right? So you can be physically capable of running a distance, but if you're not mentally prepared for, the uncertainty or just what comes up, if you can't manage that, if you can't adjust your mind, then obviously it limits yourself. I see a lot of runners and they're kind of perfectionistic, right? They like to have everything scheduled and fit. And I think that can help you in your training, but that can also, work against you in racing because chances are something unforeseen is going to happen.
Yeah, so that it's so interesting to hear your thoughts on it, because I've spoken to a lot of ultra runners and obviously heard it from from their point of view about how they deal with the mental side of things. If you could say there were some fundamental characteristics of a successful ultra runner, would you be able to pinpoint what they are?
Yeah, and I would say it, that the obvious answer is, the physical abilities that people have, right? I mean, there are people who are just physically fit or, their bodies are suited for certain sport like running. I think when I look at ultra running or just any sports that are multi-day kind of sports, I think the folks who do well in that, it's kind of, I think of them as kind of in the old days, these explorers, these adventurers, these people who would take off, like say a Lewis and Clark, right? Where you take off and you head out west and you have a general idea of what's out there. And you think, you're the route that you're going to take and you think, what you're going to run into, but you really don't. And so these type of adventurers that, are, several hundred years ago, they had an adventure, what you call the spirit or the heart of adventure, which is they embraced the uncertainty. They knew that they were going into an event or an adventure, and they knew that they didn't know what was going to happen. And they accepted that from the get-go. And because they accepted the uncertainty, when the uncertainty happened, they didn't wrestle with it, or it didn't throw them off. And I think of people who need to have everything perfect and just so and in place. And I think that if that's how you approach life, where everything has to be, you know, screwed down just tight, and you have to prepare for everything, I don't think you can do that. And so I think people who, you might call them perfectionistic, or, you know, type A folks who need to have everything just so, I think that actually can work against you. Even though that trait can be helpful in your training, I think when you actually get into a race or you're running a distance that you haven't before, that, you know, call it flexibility or adaptability, I think that is a really an important trait to have, as well as being comfortable with the uncertainty of life and the uncertainty of a race or, you know, an event, if it's, you know, several days long.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. A lot can happen when you head out on these 100-mile races and things, can't it? Okay, in your book, Elite Minds, you talk about the role in performance of the conscious and the unconscious mind, as well as a person's belief. Can you explain a little bit about that to us, and particularly how it might relate to ultra running?
Yeah, so your conscious mind is just a part of your mind that you're aware of. So in other words, the mind, as I think of it, it does two things. It thinks and it emits emotion, right? So being aware of your mind means you're aware of your thought process and your belief system, as well as what your, you know, your emotional experience is being, right? So in the conscious mind, people who you would say are conscious or aware or insightful, they have a good sense of what they think, and then the, you know, the corresponding emotional piece of that. The unconscious mind is the stuff that's going on that you don't have awareness of, but it's still affecting you. And one of the things I do with the athletes I work with is I'm really trying to encourage them to become more aware of themselves and be honest with themselves, right? Because there's the person that I want to be, and then there's the person that I actually am. And when you think about the conscious mind, what I think is really helpful in that regard is to simply learn to observe your mind. So in other words, you can have a thought and you can observe the thought, right? That's the essence of metacognition, to think about your own thinking. So to have a thought, and you can get so caught up with your mind, what your mind's doing, that you actually become your thoughts and you become your emotions. In other words, you have no space between them. And what I encourage people to do is to observe their mind in action. In other words, I could be having a thought and I could think to myself, isn't this an interesting thought? Or why am I thinking about this again? Or you can find yourself in an emotional place and say, isn't it interesting that I'm feeling overwhelmed right now? Or isn't it interesting that I feel anxious? And so a lot of people are interested in changing the mind, right? And of course, there's a lot of psychologists and other people, and that's the essence of what they're trying to get you to do, right? Is to conquer your own mind. What I think you have to do before that, though, is you have to be an expert at observing your mind. So just the awareness of what you're thinking, what you're telling yourself, or what you're feeling, and knowing that and being able to step back from it and observe it, that is tremendously helpful. And that is, to me, is the kind of the cornerstone of awareness, is the ability to observe yourself. So for example, you may be going into a race and you may have a thought that, you know, I don't think I'm going to be able to do this. You can identify with that thought so much that you think the thought is who you are, versus no, it's just a thought I'm having, right? And so this ability at a conscious level to observe your own thoughts and to understand that they're not who you are, they're just a thought, and that you can observe it, and realizing when you detach yourself from it, that then you can create another thought, right? So I can have a thought that, oh, there's no way I'm going to be able to do this. And I can also have the thought of, yes, I can do it. I'll figure it out. But generally, whichever thought your mind is focused on, right, or whatever belief you're focused on, you know, I'm good enough, I'm not good enough to do it, that becomes your truth. In other words, what you hold as true is what you're thinking, right? And so to understand that I can actually have a thought that's not true, or you can have a belief about yourself that's not true. And I can assure everyone who's listening You do. You have thoughts that aren't accurate, and you have beliefs about yourself as a person as well as a runner that aren't accurate. And if you don't start there and realize, you know, that you're distorting it, not because you're a bad person, but because you're a person, that's what we do. But if you understand that you have thoughts and beliefs that are not an accurate portrayal of who you are, then now you're in a place where you can begin to adjust those.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So in the light of that, of what you've said about, you know, particularly sort of going into a race and having thoughts about whether you're going to be able to do it, if there was someone who was watching who had perhaps thought they're not capable of running an ultra, or perhaps they've entered one and now they're feeling anxious and having doubts about their abilities, what would you say would be, what's a good place to start to try and, you know, change that mindset?
Right. Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say is your ability to run long distances, that's built into your DNA. That's who we are as a species, right? I mean, imagine if you were, I don't know, a deer or an antelope, you know, you would say, well, I'm a deer, of course I can run well, or I'm an antelope, of course I can run. Well, you're a human being. Human beings are designed to do this, right? Maybe not necessarily running, but even walking, where we would cover, you know, 25 to 50 kilometers a day, day after day after day. Our species has done that. We know that. And so we know that with a minimal amount of training, you can condition yourself to do that. I mean, I go over to Spain quite frequently and walk the Camino de Santiago, and most people do about 25 kilometers a day, and they do that for 30 days in a row, right? And these are not trained athletes. I mean, some people train minimally, some do. But what I would say is just to understand that as a species, we were designed, you know, to travel by foot long distances. And so that's in your DNA, even though maybe you haven't done that, you know, in your, you know, current life. So understanding that you're physically capable of doing that. And then the other part is then what do you believe? So obviously, if I haven't done something before, it's going to be very difficult for me to believe that I'm capable of doing it, right? But for the person, you know, who's really questioning themselves, I would suggest to don't make it quite so personal, right? Think of yourself as a member of a species that for, you know, tens of thousands of years has been traveling long distances day after day after day, and we're designed to do that, and we do that very effectively. And then what will happen as you get into your training, you will just gradually, you know, you'll go a distance you've never gone before, right? You know, I walked with my brother over Christmas holidays. We were down at the beach and we're on this island, and I said, let's walk from one end of the island to the other. And so we looked up how far it was, and it was 13 miles. And he said, well, I've never gone 13 miles before. And I said, you know, and he's, you know, 60 years old, come up on 60. And I said, yeah, but you can do it. You know, we have all day to do it. Yeah. Right. And so there's a lot of people like that. They've never really pushed themselves to a point of, I mean, you're going to be uncomfortable in doing it. Right. And you may get some blisters, but the fact of the matter is you can do that. And so that would be the thing I'd want people to understand is, number one is you're a member of a species that's designed to go far day after day after day. And all you have to do is just begin to push that distance back, right? Do 5 miles, and then do 6 miles, and then do 10 miles, right? And then do 12. And I think when you're building up, it's important that you allow yourself to walk as well, right? It's not important that you run the whole 15 miles. I'm talking about from a psychological standpoint as well as physical. What's really important is that you go and that you cover that distance, right? Or you stay out for a period of time. I know some people, they think if they're not running at a certain pace, it doesn't count. Mm-hmm. I think just the opposite. I think covering the distance, however you do that, even if you walk the whole thing, it is significant.
Yeah, it's nice to hear you say that, because I know a lot of people do get hung up on the idea that somehow they've cheated if they've walked. Which is, you know, it shouldn't be the case at all, should it? You know.
No, what you should be trying to do is to do something you haven't done before. You know, cover a distance that you haven't covered before.
Yeah.
And then once you do that, what you'll realize is I don't know how far I can go, because that's the truth for most of us, right? You don't know how far you can go. And most of us, even if you're an ultra runner, you'll probably go to your grave never knowing that, because you won't be in a situation that demands it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if somebody was chasing after you, you would go further and faster than you normally did.
Yeah.
But we know this from history of people, fleeing their homes and their countries. They go these tremendous distances. And I'm talking about people that aren't trained as athletes, right? So that's what I believe about us. I believe that as a species, we're tremendously capable of covering long distances over numerous days, not just one day, but, following up, again and again and again.
Yeah, that's tremendously interesting. Okay, in your book, you talk about replacing better with best. Can you tell the audience what you mean by that?
Yeah, so I'm an American, and I would say in the U.S. we're obsessed with better, right? So no matter what you're doing, you can do it. You can do better, and we lift this up as a preferred ideal, right? That, in other words, if you're not constantly trying to get better, then you've essentially given up. My feeling is our obsession with better is not really about this desire to grow. I think our obsession with better is about this fundamental belief that most of us don't feel that we're good enough or that we're enough. In other words, I'm not currently adequate. I'm not at an acceptable level. Therefore, I need to be better. And I think in that regard, I think it's not helpful, right? You have a fundamental belief about yourself, and your fundamental belief about yourself is I'm good enough or I'm not good enough. I'm enough or I'm not enough. I'm acceptable or I'm not acceptable. And my belief is as we are sitting right now, we are acceptable. You are enough. And so instead of trying to be a better version of yourself, which is, this concept of growth, what I believe we should do is simply do the best that we can do right now, right? And that's the conversation you should have with yourself. If you're going to the gym today, or you're going out for the run today, you just say to yourself, just do the best I can today. And if you consistently do what you're capable of doing, which is what your best is, right? It's what you're capable of. If you constantly do what you're capable of doing, that's going to give you a nice growth curve, right? In other words, so if you think about this concept of getting better or growth and development, people who challenge themselves to do their best consistently, you're going to develop faster, you're going to grow faster, you're going to get stronger doing that. You follow me? Yeah. So I think the conversation we should be having with ourselves is not, I need to do better or what can I do to be better? The conversation we should really be having is what am I capable of today? What is the best that I can do today? What's the best I can do in this particular situation? And then do that, right? The other thing is as adults, is we forget that we're constantly growing and developing. You with me? Like most of us, when we were little, if you had older siblings, you wanted to be bigger, right? You wanted to grow. But when you were a child, you grew not because you wanted to grow, you grew because you were designed to do this, right? Yeah. So it's growth is a natural process. Well, it's also true as adults. Growth is a natural process. In other words, you're not going to grow because you want to grow. You're going to grow because you're designed to grow. For most people, what they need to do is not try to get better, but they actually need to eliminate the things that are impeding their natural growth. You follow me? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, they need to do stuff like, eliminating foods and getting more rest and, just taking better care of themselves or taking things out of their, day-to-day activity that are holding them back. That would help them much more than, this obsession with being better or being more.
Yeah. Gosh, I'm learning such a lot. And also such a lot, I think there's a lot of things I would love that you've just said that I would love you to say to my children about, doing the best you can do.
Well, I think for those of us who are parents, or for those of us that are the boss at work, what we should ask people to do is to do their best. Yeah. Because you're capable of doing your best. And what's interesting, I've read some research on this, and most people say, no, I'm not doing my best. But the reason I want people to do their best is not so that they can achieve something or win a trophy or make the company more money. The reason I want people to do their best is because I want them to have that experience of themselves. You follow me? Yeah. When you observe yourself at your best, when you experience the best of yourself, that's very life affirming, right? And that's very different than trying to become something that you're not, right?
Yeah.
All you have to do is simply do what you're capable of. Because I tell people all the time, I said, can you do, because as people get really mad when I say kill better, right? And I said, but can you do any better than your best? You can't. So you're either doing what you're capable of doing or you're not. And all I'm saying is practice doing what you're capable of doing, and that'll become your new MO, because that's what you're asking yourself to do. And then you don't have to worry about better. The other thing with better is oftentimes it's tied to a comparison to what, as you're monitoring your progress as a runner. My belief is you should be comparing yourself to your old self, not to someone else.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, gosh, also interesting. In the book, you also talk about the state of flow. What is flow, and what would you define as peak performance within a long endurance event like ultra running?
Yeah, so flow or zone is basically a mental state that you get in that allows your body to perform at its most optimal level, okay? And what most people don't understand about flow or zone is that when you're in that state, your mind is not active. You're not thinking, right? So, the typical thing is an athlete has a, really good game, let's say, and then the announcer comes over and puts the microphone in their face and says, what were you thinking about today? You played awesome. Well, the answer is they weren't thinking. It's the absence of thought. It's the being aware of what's going on in front of you, using your sensory perception and not your mind. That's what sets you up. So it's not that I'm running, it's just that this body is running. You follow me? Yeah. And so when you're in the flow state, you're not self-evaluating. You're not thinking, how am I doing? Am I doing it good enough? Should I do it better? You're just running. And the running is happening automatically. And I know most of the people who run a lot, you've had these experiences where you were in your body running, but you didn't have this experience that you were trying to make yourself run, right?
Yeah.
It was, like a car rolling down a hill. It was doing it by itself.
Yeah.
So this selfless concept is that you have no ego, you have no sense of self. You essentially get out of your own way, which is very similar to the mental state that mystical spiritual people put themselves in, where there's a sense of no self. The other thing that happens when you're in the flow state is your perception of time and space gets distorted. So generally things would slow down, or things would look bigger or smaller depending. So in other words, when you're in a flow state, you could be doing something that's actually very physically demanding, but your experience of it is that it's happening naturally and easily. In other words, you might be running fast, but you're not trying to run fast. Okay. Yeah. All you're doing is just kind of leaving yourself alone and let the running take care of itself. So, selfless, timeless and effortless. That's how you're in flow. And of course, for people who've run for a while and have run any significant difference, you've had this experience. And of course, then the question is, well, then how do I create it again? Yeah. And the answer is by not trying to create it again, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. It's like like first saying, how do I stop worrying? What should I think about? And I said, no, actually, you want to think about nothing. That would be the best way, right?
Yeah.
In other words, you don't have to have a thought. You don't have to have an intention.
Yeah. If it's those runs where you just feel like you could run forever, isn't it? That's the way I would, when that's how it feels.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you're out on a training run and you get in that state, that's probably a good thing to do, is forget about, you know, what the mileage was today.
Yeah, that's really interesting. If only we could, like you say, know how to recreate that on every run.
Do it by not trying to create it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Okay, can you tell us about what you refer to as the big why and its relationship with intention and goals?
Yeah, so one of the things I ask people, especially people who are trying to say, you know, do something of significance in sport, I ask them, why are you wanting to do this? And you know, it'd be like in business, it'd be an easy example. There are people who go into business because they really have a passion to do something, right? Provide a service or a product. And there are people who go into business because they say, hey, I can make a lot of money, right? My feeling is if you go into business because there's something that you're really passionate about, or you really want to do, you'll frequently find yourself making money and making more money than you thought you would do. I think for sport, especially, you know, adults who are, you know, your sport is your recreation. It's not your job. Okay. To understand that the main reason your why, say for running is that it's your recreation, it's your enjoyment, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it's important that you preserve that. That I see people and they get really caught up into, you know, I have to run this pace, or I have to run this marathon, or I have to run this distance, right? And because the sense is, well, if I do that, then I'm going to be okay. Or if I, you know, if I run 5 marathons this year instead of 4, I'm going to somehow be a better person, you know. Or if I go from running a, you know, a 50K to a 50 miler, then I'm going to really be good or acceptable. And to me, those aren't very good whys. I mean, you're trying to fill up a empty hole with something that's not going to fill it up, right? The main thing I think reason to run is because it's enjoyable to you, and you enjoy doing it, and you believe that you're making yourself, you know, a better person, a healthier person by doing it. I think if you start with that, right, that I run because I enjoy it, and it's something that brings joy to me and makes me happy. It's an activity, you know, that I can share with other people. That would be the why, right? And preserve that. Then if you get to the point where you can run really fast, or you can really run a far distance, well, that's great. But if you ever turn it into, you know, I need to achieve this goal so that I can feel good about myself, you're going to start robbing yourself of some of the joy. Then it's going to go from I want to I have to, right? And I think it's really important to preserve that I'm doing this because I want to do it, because it adds meaning and value to my life.
Yeah, definitely. And thinking about goals, you've said in the past that goals that are not frightening are not worth having. So could you tell us a little bit about this, and also the story that you're known for putting your money where your mouth is, where this is concerned?
Yeah. So when I wrote the book, I put that quote in the book, that goals that aren't frightening aren't worth having. And what I'm saying is a lot of people, they set a goal that they know they can achieve. In other words, what they're really trying to do with their goal is avoid failure, right? So they say, okay, this year I'm gonna, you know, and then they pick a race and a distance and a time, and that becomes the goal. But they're actually doing something that they're pretty sure they can do. If you set the goal where you have, say, an equal chance of failure as you do success, you know, like a 50-50, you know, I got a 50% chance of succeeding and 50% chance of failing, just in the preparation for that event, it's going to engage you more. Like, in other words, your goal shouldn't be set up so that you don't fail. Your goal should be set up in such a way that there's a pretty good chance that you might fail. Now it's got your full attention. Now you're doing something exciting, right? And so, you know, picking a goal that makes you uncomfortable, for example, right? Picking a goal that, you know, when you wake up in the morning, you're like, oh, I better get going because this is, and just accepting that if you're trying to do something difficult or challenging, there's a chance that you might fail. Okay, but I'd rather you try to do something really big and fail than do something small and succeed, right? Because the person who did something small and succeed, they said, yeah, but I hit my goal. But people who set really big goals and maybe failed to hit that goal, they still probably did more than what they would have otherwise, right?
Yeah. Yeah, gosh, yeah.
So it's just that, you know, it's the willingness to fail. It's accepting that, you know, if I try to do something of great significance, I may fall short. Yeah, you might, but that doesn't mean it's going to be a bad experience for you.
No.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And also, speaking from my own experience, I don't think I'd really, you don't get a sense of accomplishment from doing something until there was that very real chance of failure. And then if you do manage to do it, the sense of accomplishment that you get when there was a real risk that you were going to fail is like nothing else, isn't it?
Well, it's being fully alive, right?
Yeah.
If you're trying to do something that you have a chance of succeeding and failing, that's living life. That's being fully alive. That's how you want to go through life. You know, I tell, you know, athletes that I work with in other sports, you know, maybe they're struggling a little bit and they're really disappointed. And I said, you know, you can go down a division in your sport and be a dominant player, right? In fact, you could go down to a classification such that you would win all the time, right? But if you did that, if you basically, you know, set your goals up so that you always succeeded, you would get bored with it, whatever it is. It would quit being fulfilling, right?
Yeah.
So we don't like to admit it to ourselves, but we need failure. Failure is very informative. You know, it's very helpful. And trying to, if your goal is to avoid failure, you're doing yourself a huge disservice. Yeah. Your goal should be that in the pursuit of this goal, I might fail, and you accept that, right?
Yeah.
And that's really, so that's what I mean by, you know, goals that aren't frightening aren't worth having.
Yeah. How important is a supportive environment to someone who's running an ultra? How much of a difference does it make to have that network of support around you?
Well, I think it's important because human beings are social animals, and so we're affected and we're influenced by the people around us. And I think it's ideal that you know, your partner, your family, your, you know, neighborhood, your tribe supports you in doing that. It's not necessary, though. I mean, for people who don't have a support network, I wouldn't say that, you know, that makes it impossible for them. It might, you know, they might have to work a little bit harder. The main thing is that you don't have people that are trying to sabotage you. Mm. You don't have people that are trying to, you know, limit you. Yeah. That would be much more important than, you know, to not have people that are going to undermine you versus having people who are going to help you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very true. And do you have any specific thoughts on how, for example, a crew member or a pacer might be able to help a competitor who is, you know, really struggling or, you know, perhaps thinking about quitting? Are there anything, you know, anything you could sort of share that might be helpful?
Well, I think it's smart to do that, especially if you're doing really long runs like 100-milers, right? That you would have people, you know, come in and run with you for, you know, 10 or 15 miles at a time. I think that's really helpful, you know, to be there and encourage you, because there's probably a time when you're going to want to quit. But if you're doing an activity with another person, like if you were running 100-mile and I'm going to run the last 20 with you, the fact that I'm there with you, it's kind of like if you quit, then I have to quit too. Yeah. You follow me? Yeah. And so I think doing something as a team or having a shared experience can be really helpful, just simply because we're social animals, and, you know, we do better, you know, when we're surrounded by people who are trying to do the same thing that we're doing.
Yeah, work towards a sort of common goal, you know, it's, I suppose.
Right.
Okay. Can you tell us why it's better to concentrate on being a winner, not the winner in ultra running?
Yeah, so this is another concept I talked about in the book, and basically what I was referring to is that, you know, people just saying it, you know, I want to be the winner, as if in an event there's only one person that can win. You know, so in an ultra race, yeah, there's one person who's going to cross first. You with me?
Yeah.
But I would suggest that there are multiple people who could be winners. Winning essentially is did you get what you wanted, right? Did you achieve what you wanted to achieve? So for some people, winning is you ran the distance, right? Or that you ran the distance in a time that you hadn't run before. But I think our society really likes to rank people and positions and, you know, put everything in a neat box. But I think, you know, especially if you're a recreational runner, if you hit your goal, or even if you completed the race, you know, why would you not let yourself feel good about that? You know, I don't understand that. I see people and they do Ironmans or they do ultras, and, you know, next day they said, yeah, I'm a little disappointed. You know, I wanted to, you know, say break, you know, 10 hours, and I did it in 10 hours and 3 minutes. And I'm like, you know, like, so you're going to let 3 minutes ruin your day, really?
Yeah.
So I see people getting caught up in that, right? That there's, you know, a specific time I have to run. If I don't get a PR, you know, then it's not a win for me. And I don't see the value in that way of thinking. I think if you do something difficult that you wanted to do, you've embittered your life. You've made yourself a, you know, better, stronger person. To me, that's a win.
Yeah.
And I think multiple people. I gave an example in the book of a 10K race where I think it was 4 world records were set in one race. You know, two guys broke the world record, and but only one of them won the race. And then that same race, the Canadian record was broken, and the NC2A record was broken. Right. Yeah. And it was an incredible race.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe I have, you know, for the super competitive person, maybe they don't like my definition of winning, but winning is essentially, you know, achieving what you set out to achieve.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. Okay. So if we think about optimist, pessimist, and realist, which one produces the best performance?
Well, let me put it to you this way. Does it benefit you to overestimate what you're capable of doing, or underestimate what you're capable of doing?
Overestimate.
Yes. So in other words, if I could say run a distance at 6 minutes, and I think a 6-minute pace, and I thought I could run a 5:55 pace, that would benefit me better than, you know, doing just the opposite of saying I only can run a 6:15 pace. Right? So you know, but back to your question, I would throw the realist out, because most people believe that their mind is being realistic. Okay. The reality is, though, is you don't know what you're capable of, because you haven't done it yet. And so you're making up, you know, what we were talking about now is the future, right? And so the question is, who knows what's going to happen in the future? And I'd say the answer is no one knows the future, but yet we all have plans, right? We all have a calendar or a diary of what we're going to do later today or tomorrow or the next day. But even when you make plans like that, or you talk about your future, you don't present it as a fictitious story. You present your future plans or your future expectations as nonfiction, as reality. But the fact of the matter is, it's fiction, because you don't know what's going to happen. And so, given the fact that you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or the day after or the week, months, and years ahead, what kind of fictitious story do you make up, right? That you're going to call my future. And what I would say is make up a really good one.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, if you're gonna write fiction, which we're all doing, write a really good fiction story. Don't write a bummer, terrible fiction story. Right. But
Yeah.
so people do this. And so if your future story is something, bad's going to happen, then you walk around anxious and worried all the time, which is, in the US is epidemic levels. I mean, that's one of the number one problems in America is people having, anxiety, which is simply, thinking negatively about the future. Right.
Yeah.
And so we've actually created a disorder by making up fictitious stories and believing that they're true. That's the essence of anxiety. You'd be much better off to say, I don't know what's going to happen today or tomorrow or day after. Yeah, you don't. Okay, we'll make peace with that. Right?
Yeah.
So that's really the problem that I see is that, what you might call in your question pessimistic is really people thinking negatively or anxiously about the future. Yeah. And it becomes debilitating. But the fact of the matter is you don't know what's going to happen to you next, and no one else does either.
No, quite. Gosh, yeah. Okay. So obviously, lots of our audience will obviously be, established ultra runners. When they're, in a race and deep into what people often refer to as a pity party, thinking about quitting, that sort of thing. What sort of, how can you help yourself? What sort of strategies can you use to try and get out of that mindset?
Well, I think the first one is just realizing that that's part of the race, right? That if you're doing something really difficult, doesn't matter what it is, probably somewhere during that process, you're going to say, I don't want to be doing this right now, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I can think of many things that would fall into that category, right? Childbirth. I mean, I haven't personally experienced, I've observed it, but I imagine, a lot of women in the middle of it, like, I really wish this wasn't happening to me right now, right? But it is. And so I think going into difficult things with the realization that there's probably going to be a point in time where I'm not going to want to do this. Yeah. Okay. And so not being surprised by the fact that you want to quit. And having some kind of pre-planned way of how you're going to negotiate that, right? So maybe if it's an ultra runner, when you get to that place, you allow yourself to walk for a while, or maybe you take a break and you sit down, and you have something to eat and you have something to drink. I've got a good friend, Ian Torrance, who's, one of the top ultra runners in America. He's done a couple of hundred now, I think. And he and I talk about that. And he said, yeah, you're just going to be in that place and you don't have to react to it. You just give yourself some time and some space. Right. And so maybe you say, I'm going to, I feel like I'm going to die. So I'm going to sit here for 10 minutes. Right. And I'm going to eat and drink something. And then in 10 minutes, I'll check back in, and there's chances are pretty good. You're going, well, I feel a little bit better, but I'm not there yet. Okay. Well, then give yourself another 10 minutes. Mm. But I think you should expect that wanting to quit or not wanting to be having the experience that you're having is just part of it. Right. I mean, it's a fundamental Buddhist teaching. The Buddha taught that we suffer not because of what's happening to us. We suffer because we don't want it to happen. Right. Yeah. That suffering is essentially resisting that which is. And so when you get in the middle of a race and you're really hurting, if you start telling yourself, this shouldn't be happening to me, or I don't want this to happen, you're just going to prolong your own suffering. But if you're in the middle of, say, a 100-mile race and you're feeling really bad, if you can say to yourself, well, this is what it feels like, at mile 50 or 70, is you feel like you're going to die. And this happens to most people, but it's going to pass. But this is how it's supposed to be. You follow me?
Yeah.
Then you have a very different experience with it. Yeah. I worked with two women who were doing the bike ride, the race across America, the Ram race. And they were doing it as a 2-woman team, and they set the world record. But what I said to them in the preparation, I said, pedaling the bike, that's going to be the easy part. The difficult part is dealing with all the things that come up along the way, right? The adversity that you didn't perceive. And so much of what we talked about is, preparing for those things. And then after the race, and they set the world record, they called me and they said, you're exactly right. It was the hardest part was, the unexpected, things that happened. But that's what we talked about. What are you going to do when this happens? What are you going to do when this happens? So for an ultra runner, you need to say to yourself, if I get to a point where I want to quit the race, here's what I'm going to do, right? Here's my strategy. I'm going to walk, or I'm going to sit down, or I'm going to eat something, or I'm going to wait 30 minutes, whatever it is. And just expect that that's probably going to be part of it.
Yeah.
Wanting to quit and quitting are not the same thing.
No.
There's a lot of people who wanted to quit but didn't quit, right? And so give yourself that out. In other words, the fact that you would want to quit, don't penalize yourself for that. That's probably actually your brain doing a survival thing, right? Your brain is saying, don't keep doing this or you're going to kill yourself, because the brain hasn't been in that experience. He doesn't know, right? That's the advantage that people who've done, multiple ultras have, is they realize, oh yeah, I remember thinking I was going to die. I remember this feeling, right? Yeah. And you realize, but you don't. You realize, well, if you stop for 15 minutes, it'll pass. But just having a plan, a strategy for that.
Yeah. Yes, yeah, that's really interesting to hear you say that. It's almost like going into the mindset of when you get into that pity party, thinking, oh, this is it, here it is, this is what I've trained for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you think it's a bad thing, if you think you're not supposed to have that experience, you're going to make it worse.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, you discussed the topic of the self-fulfilling prophecy. What role do you think that plays in endurance events, and particularly in ultra running?
Oh, I think it's not only prominent in ultra running, I think it pretty much dictates most of what happens to us in our lives. The self-fulfilling prophecy is basically, we all have a belief about what's going to happen, right? I talked earlier about we all make up a fictitious story called My Future, right? That's part of the self-fulfilling prophecy. So you have a belief about what's going to happen to you, and unconsciously you're bringing that about, but you don't know it, right? Yeah. And this is why people, repeat, a mistake over and over again. It's the reason why people have repeated successes over and over again, is because they believe that that's what's supposed to happen. And that's really what the self-fulfilling prophecy is. It's what you believe is true and what you believe is going to happen. And we live into that. That's why, your earlier question about the unconscious and conscious mind, it's really important that you become more aware of your unconscious beliefs of yourself, right? So as a ultra runner is, what am I capable of doing? I think the best way to answer that is you don't know. But once you start pretending that you do, you're probably going to limit yourself, right? Mm. Or if you go too big, you might hurt yourself.
Yeah, I guess it's that idea of what some people say is how far you believe you will run is as far as you will go. So if you think to yourself, oh, I can run 10 miles, then you've already sort of. But if you think, oh, I couldn't possibly run further than a 10K, it's that's all you'll do.
Yeah. I remember watching a YouTube video of it was like a 25-year-old guy, and he wanted to see if he could run a marathon without training for it. And he documented it. Of course, he completed the race, and he felt like hell the next day, as you might imagine. But, that was basically his question is can one run a marathon without training? And the answer is yes, some people can. Yeah.
Yeah. But as long as you're prepared for it to hurt the next day.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Finally, as we bring the interview to a close, obviously there's lots of ultra runners watching. What would be one piece of advice or one action that they could take in order to perhaps begin to improve the process of their ultra running, so improve their performance?
Well, I think the obvious answer is, set goals, hire a coach, hire a trainer, change your nutrition, right? Sleep more, eat better. But everybody knows that, right? I mean, that's the obvious stuff. My answer to that is, and I alluded to it earlier, which is preserving the joy, understanding that you picked this sport, okay, for a reason, and allowing yourself to enjoy it and to be transformed by it, okay? That's one of the things that I think is true with endurance sports, is it has the capacity to strengthen you in a way, both physically and mentally and spiritually, the way other things can't. So the fact that you pick that, preserve that, and don't let a time or a goal ruin that for you. I would say that piece, right? The other thing is that, this thing that we call success, it's possible to be successful or to run faster and further with not really actually trying to do that. In other words, it's kind of the saying that, happiness happens. In other words, you become happy not because you want to be happy. You become happy because you do the things that allow you to be happy, right? And so what I would say is really stay focused on the process. What are the things that you do day after day after day that you really enjoy? What are the behaviors, what are the activities that you really enjoy? Preserve those first and foremost, and let those be more important than running a particular time or distance. And if you do that, you're probably going to find yourself running times and distance that you never thought you would be capable of doing. Success happens not because you want to be successful. Success happens as a result of the things that you do day after day after day, right?
Yeah.
Right. Success is a consequence to your behavior. And I think that we need to let the behavior be more important than the results. Yeah. Let the activities, the lifestyle, the things that you do day after day after day, that's primary. Let that be first and foremost. And then the results that you get or the trophies that you get, that's secondary or tertiary.
Yeah, that's so the success is kind of the byproduct of the enjoyment, really.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. It's the consequence. It's the result of what you do.
Yeah. What brilliant. Yeah, that was brilliant. Well, I think that just about brings us to the end of the session. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Beecham. It's been so interesting to talk to you, and I know that people will get such a lot out of the
You're welcome.
What we'll do is we'll put the links on online so that everyone can include into your book, Elite Minds. So lots of people might like to go and have a look at that. Thank you, everybody, for watching.